You know what I got tired of? Spraying. Every week, sometimes twice a week, I was out there with a backpack sprayer, battling aphids on my tomatoes, cabbage worms on my broccoli, beetles on my beans. And the thing is, the sprays worked for about 5 days. Then the pests came right back and I'd be out there again. I spent more time fighting bugs than actually enjoying my garden. Then I noticed something that changed everything. Pictures of Japanese kitchen gardens, and there wasn't a sprayer in sight. Their vegetables looked healthier than mine, and they weren't fighting the same battles I was fighting. What were they doing differently? Turns out they weren't controlling pests at all. They were designing gardens where pests never become a big problem in the first place. Today, I'm going to show you the Japanese companion planting methods that naturally repel pests and attract the beneficial insects that do your pest control for you. No chemicals, no constant spraying, just smart plant combinations that work. And stick around to the end because I'll show you a clever trap crop strategy that Japanese gardeners use to protect their most valuable plants. I'll admit something to you. For most of my gardening life, I thought companion planting was kind of wishy-washy. Plant marigold somewhere, maybe some basil near your tomatoes. Hope for the best. I tried it a few times with random pairings I'd read about, and honestly, I didn't see much difference, so I went back to spraying. But a few years ago, I started really studying how traditional Japanese kitchen gardens are laid out. Not just what they plant, but where they plant it, how close together, what goes next to what. And I realized the problem wasn't companion planting itself. The problem was that I'd been doing it wrong. I was sprinkling companion plants around like decorations instead of using them as a system. When I started applying the actual principles behind Japanese plant pairings, everything shifted. My pest pressure dropped. I stopped reaching for the sprayer every week, and my garden started working with me instead of against me. Here's the philosophy that makes this work, and once you understand it, the specific pairings will make a lot more sense. In Japanese Satyama farming traditions, the garden isn't seen as a collection of individual crops. It's seen as a living system where every plant has relationships with the plants around it. The word Satyama refers to the border zone between mountain wilderness and human cultivation, a place where nature and farming blend together. And the principle that comes from this tradition is simple but powerful. A diverse garden regulates itself. Pests thrive in monoculture because it's easy for them. They locate their target crop by smell. They find row after row of exactly what they want, and they multiply. But when you break up that monoculture with strong scented plants, when you create diversity that confuses pest navigation, when you attract the predators that eat the pests, you create a system that stays in balance without constant intervention. That's not mystical thinking, that's ecology, and Japanese gardeners figured it out through centuries of careful observation long before we had studies to confirm it. Now let me show you exactly how to apply this in your own garden. The first plant pairing you need to know about is Shiso, also called perilla or Japanese basil. If there's one companion plant that shows up in nearly every traditional Japanese kitchen garden, it's Shiso. And it's not just because they use it in cooking, although they do. It's because Shiso is one of the most effective pest-repelling plants you can grow. Shiso produces powerful volatile compounds, the aromatic oils you can smell when you brush against the leaves. These compounds are highly offensive to many common garden pests, including aphids, spider mites, and flea beetles. When you plant Shiso near your tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, or cucumbers, those volatile compounds create an invisible barrier that makes it harder for pests to locate your crops. Here's the science behind it. Most insects find their host plants primarily through smell. They detect the specific chemical signature of the plant they want to eat, and they fly toward it. But when you interplant with something strongly aromatic like Shiso, you're essentially jamming their signal. The Shiso smell masks or confuses the scent of your vegetables, and pests fly right past without landing. They're not killed, they just can't find their target. Here's how to do this effectively. Plant Shiso about 12 to 18 inches away from your main crops. You want it close enough that the aromatic compounds overlap with your vegetables, but not so close that it competes for root space. For a typical tomato bed, I plant one Shiso every 3 to 4 feet along the row. For eggplants or peppers, one Shiso plant between every 2 or 3 vegetable plants works well. The key is consistency. Random Shiso plants scattered around won't create the continuous scent barrier you need. Think of it as building a fragrant fence around your crops. Start your Shiso from seed indoors about 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost or direct sow after soil temperatures reach 60 degrees Fahrenheit. It grows in zones 4 through 11, so most American gardeners can grow it successfully. The plants get about 2 feet tall and will reseed themselves if you let some flowers go to seed, giving you free pest protection year after year. And here's the bonus. Shiso leaves are delicious. Use them in salads, wrap them around rice, add them to stir fries. You're getting pest control and a crop at the same time. The second pairing comes from how Japanese gardeners protect their brassicas, the cabbage family plants that seem to attract every pest in the garden. Cabbage moths, root maggots, flea beetles, these pests can devastate broccoli, cabbage, kale, and cauliflower. The Japanese solution is negi, N-E-H-G, which are Japanese bunching onions, though regular green onions or scallions work on the same principle. Alliums, the onion family, produce sulfur compounds that most brassica pests find repulsive. When you interplant negi directly in your brassica beds, you create a chemical barrier that deters egg-laying moths and confuses root maggots trying to locate their host plants. The traditional method is to plant negi in a grid pattern throughout your brassica bed, roughly one bunching onion every 2 to 3 feet in all directions. This creates overlapping zones of protection, so no cabbage plant is far from an allium neighbor. Some Japanese gardeners take it further and plant a continuous row of negi around the entire perimeter of their brassica patch, creating a border that pests must cross to reach the crops inside. Here's what makes this work beyond just the smell. Cabbage root maggots, one of the most destructive brassica pests, locate their targets by detecting chemicals released by brassica roots. When allium roots are nearby, they release competing compounds that interfere with this detection. The maggot flies get confused and often lay their eggs in the wrong place, away from your actual crops. Timing matters here. Plant your negi at least 2 to 3 weeks before transplanting your brassicas. You want those allium roots established and actively releasing their protective compounds before your vulnerable seedlings go in the ground. Negi are cold hardy and can be planted in early spring in zones 3 through 9. They're perennial in most climates. So once established, they come back year after year, giving you permanent pest protection infrastructure in your brassica beds. One thing I want to be honest about, this pairing significantly reduces pest pressure, but it may not eliminate every single cabbage moth. In years with heavy pest populations, you might still see some damage, but the difference between a protected bed and an unprotected bed is dramatic. I went from losing 30 to 40% of my brassica crops to pest damage down to less than 10% without spraying a single thing. The third method involves chrysanthemums, and this one has some serious science behind it. You may have heard of pyrethrin, one of the most widely used natural insecticides in the world. It's derived from chrysanthemum flowers, specifically Chrysanthemum cinerarifolium and related species. Japanese gardeners have been planting chrysanthemums as border plants for centuries, long before anyone isolated the active compound. What they observed was simple. Beds bordered by chrysanthemums had fewer pest problems than beds without them. Here's why this works. Chrysanthemum plants release pyrethrins not just in their flowers, but in smaller amounts through their leaves and stems throughout the growing season. These compounds affect the nervous systems of insects, causing paralysis and death in small pests that come into direct contact and repelling others that detect the compounds in the air. When you plant chrysanthemums as a continuous border around your garden beds, you're creating a living pesticide barrier that operates around the clock without any effort from you. The traditional Japanese approach is to plant chrysanthemums in a ring around the entire vegetable garden, or at minimum around the beds containing your most pest-prone crops. Space the plants about 18 inches apart to create a dense, continuous border. The plants should be established and actively growing before your main crops go in, so plant them in early spring or even the fall before. In zones 5 through 9, most chrysanthemum varieties are perennial and will come back stronger each year, creating a permanent protective border that you plant once and benefit from for seasons to come. Now, I want to be clear about something. The chrysanthemums you plant as borders won't kill pests as dramatically as a concentrated pyrethrin spray would. The compounds are more dilute when coming from living plants, but what they do is create a deterrent zone. Many pests will avoid crossing that border entirely, and those that do will be weakened or disoriented. Combined with the other companion planting methods, chrysanthemum borders add another layer of protection that makes your garden increasingly inhospitable to pests. A practical tip from my own experience: don't just plant ornamental mums from the garden center and expect strong pest protection. Look for Chrysanthemum cinerarifolium, sometimes sold as pyrethrum daisy, or Tanacetum Sedum coccineum, the painted daisy. These species have the highest concentrations of active compounds. They're not as showy as the big fluffy mums you see in fall displays, but they're working much harder for your garden. If you're finding value in learning how Japanese gardeners approach pest control, take a second to subscribe. I've been exploring these traditional methods from different cultures, and there's so much more practical wisdom to share. Now let's keep going with the next pairing, because we're about to shift from repelling pests to attracting the insects that eat them. This fourth method takes a different approach. Instead of just pushing pests away, you're going to invite their predators in. One of the best plants for this in the Japanese companion planting tradition is edamame, the immature soybean that's become popular in American cuisine. But Japanese gardeners have grown edamame in their vegetable plots for generations, and not just for the harvest. Edamame and other legumes are powerful attractors of beneficial insects, particularly parasitic wasps, lacewings, and ladybugs, the predators that feed on aphids, caterpillars, and other soft-bodied pests. Here's the biology behind it. Legume flowers produce nectar and pollen that many beneficial insects need to complete their life cycles. Adult parasitic wasps, for example, feed on nectar for energy, but their larvae develop inside pest insects like aphids and caterpillar eggs. By providing a food source for the adults, you're keeping a population of these beneficial predators in your garden all season long. When pest populations start to rise, the predators are already there, ready to respond. The traditional placement is to grow edamame at the ends of vegetable rows or in blocks adjacent to pest-prone crops. A patch of edamame about 4 feet by 4 feet is enough to support a healthy population of beneficials for a medium-sized garden. Let some of the plants flower fully rather than harvesting every pod, because it's the flowers that attract the beneficial insects. Here's something I noticed in my own garden after adding edamame to my companion planting system. Within the first season, I started seeing more ladybugs and lacewings than I'd ever seen before. By the second season, aphid problems that used to require intervention essentially manage themselves. The predator population had established, and they were doing the work for me. That's the goal of this approach. You're not fighting pests directly, you're building an ecosystem where pest control happens naturally. Edamame grows well in zones 3 through 9 and needs about 75 to 90 days to mature. Plant after your last frost when soil temperatures reach 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Even if you don't care for eating edamame yourself, consider growing a small patch just for the beneficial insect habitat it provides. The fifth pairing uses a principle the Japanese call confusion planting, and the star of this method is shungiku, also known as edible chrysanthemum greens or crown daisy. This is different from the ornamental chrysanthemums we talked about earlier. Shungiku is grown for its tender aromatic leaves, which are used in soups, hot pots, and salads throughout Japan. But in the garden, it serves a powerful secondary purpose. Shungiku has a strong, distinctive scent that's completely different from common vegetable crops. When you interplant shungiku throughout your vegetable beds, actually, you're adding another layer of olfactory confusion for pests trying to navigate to their target plants. The garden stops smelling like a buffet of their favorite foods and starts smelling like a confusing jumble of signals they can't sort out. The traditional method is to scatter shungiku throughout the vegetable garden rather than planting it in a dedicated bed. Tuck a shungiku plant between your tomatoes, another among your peppers, a few through your bean rows. The goal is diversity and distribution. Every few feet, a pest should encounter a different strong smell that makes navigation harder. Shungiku is fast-growing and cold-tolerant. Direct sow seeds in early spring, about 4 to 6 weeks before your last frost. It can handle light frosts and actually prefers cooler weather, making it perfect for spring and fall gardens. The plants mature in about 45 days, and you can harvest leaves continuously by cutting the outer growth and letting the center continue producing. In hot summer weather, shungiku will bolt and go to seed, but that's fine. The flowers continue providing aromatic confusion, and they also attract beneficial insects. Let it reseed, and you'll have volunteer shungiku popping up throughout your garden for years. Now let me share some patterns I've noticed in conventional pest control and how the Japanese approach handles things differently. I did most of these myself for years, so there's no judgment here, just observations that might help you make the shift. The first pattern is treating pest control as a reaction. Most of us wait until we see pest damage, then reach for a solution, but by the time you see the damage, the population's already established and reproducing. Japanese companion planting is proactive. You design the garden before planting season so the pest problems are prevented rather than treated. The companion plants are in place from day one, not added as an afterthought when problems appear. The second pattern is relying on a single solution. We tend to look for the one spray, the one product, the one trick that will solve everything. But Japanese companion planting works through layers. Aromatic plants mask crop scents, alliums deter specific pests, chrysanthemums create barrier zones, legumes attract predators. Confusion planting disrupts navigation. No single element does everything, but together they create a system that's remarkably effective. The third pattern is fighting nature instead of working with it. Every time you spray a pesticide, even an organic one, you're killing beneficial insects along with the pests. You're disrupting the ecosystem that could be regulating itself. Japanese companion planting accepts that some pests will always be present, but it builds conditions where pest populations stay manageable and predator populations stay strong. You're not trying to eliminate every bug. You're trying to achieve balance. The fourth pattern is planting in monoculture blocks. It's easier to plant all your tomatoes in one bed, all your brassicas in another, but monoculture is an invitation to pests. They find one plant and suddenly they found 100. Traditional Japanese kitchen gardens are intensively interplanted. Vegetables, herbs, aromatics, and flowers all grow together in what might look chaotic, but is actually a carefully designed system where no pest can easily find or spread through its target crop. Now here's the bonus I promised you. Japanese gardeners use a clever strategy called trap cropping that most American gardeners overlook entirely. The idea is simple but counterintuitive. You deliberately plant something that pests prefer even more than your main crops, and you sacrifice that trap crop to protect everything else. A classic example is planting nasturtiums near your brassicas. Aphids are more attracted to nasturtiums than to cabbage or broccoli. They'll colonize the nasturtiums and largely leave your vegetables alone. You can then remove and destroy the infested nasturtiums, taking a huge portion of the pest population with them, or simply let the trap crop serve as a sacrificial buffer all season. Another traditional trap crop is daikon radish planted at the ends of brassica rows. Flea beetles prefer daikon to most other brassicas, so they concentrate there instead of spreading throughout your cabbage and kale. Japanese gardeners often plant these trap crops 2 to 3 weeks before their main crops, giving pests a target that's already established when the vegetables go in. The key to making trap crops work is placement and timing. Plant them at the edges of your beds, not in the center. Plant them early so they're more established and more attractive than your main crops, and be willing to sacrifice them. A trap crop covered in pests is doing its job perfectly. That's the Japanese approach to pest control through companion planting. Shiso to mask your vegetable scents, negi to protect your brassicas, chrysanthemums to create living pesticide borders, edamame to attract beneficial predators, shungiku to add confusion throughout your beds, and trap crops to draw pests away from what you actually want to harvest. No sprayers, no chemicals, no weekly battles, just a garden designed to regulate itself. I've been gardening for over 30 years, and shifting to this approach was one of the best decisions I ever made. My pest problems dropped dramatically. I stopped spending money on products, and I started actually enjoying time in my garden instead of dreading the next infestation. If any of this changed how you think about pest control, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Which pairing are you going to try first? The shiso near your tomatoes, the negi with your brassicas, or maybe a chrysanthemum border around your whole garden? Let me know. And if you want more of these deep dives into traditional gardening wisdom, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for spending time with me today, and I'll see you in the next one.